you guys so much for having me. Thank you for the intro, Nancy. In terms of today, we'll do a little bit of introductions. I want to briefly talk about why investment readiness matters. So we definitely will get into the tool, but we'll talk about why investment readiness matters. We'll talk a little bit about the components that went into the tool, the dimensions that we used. Then we'll go into it, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But as Nancy mentioned, my name is Guillermo Mazier, and I've spent the last couple decades in economic development, both as a practitioner and also as a consultant. And my specialty, or what I tell people often, is I help communities tell better stories, start smarter strategies, and apply data and technology to make their organizations more efficient. Because the work that we do, the work that you do, I should say, in economic development, is critical, especially in today's environment. The people that live and work and play in our communities are the lifeblood for our economy. So it's really a privilege for me to be on here with you, and hopefully we can share some insights and let you know a little bit more about the tool, how best to access it, and where you can apply it in your day to day. As Nancy mentioned, I am with a special business unit of the Financial Times called FT Locations. We specialize in the analysis and the attraction of cross-border corporate investment, and we do it through a suite of digital tools, data, and consulting services. So the work that we did on this project came through our strategy and consulting business unit and teams. But part of the reason that I think this conversation is going to be interesting is because we're going to apply our diverse perspective. We have about 1,800 clients. We serve about 500 different government organizations across the world, leveraging 1.3 million data points for our research. And we've had the privilege to train around 3,500 economic development professionals across the world. One of the things that I would say is, I know that this is a training for EDA, but I will be touching on some high level strategy points. If you guys are interested in more, and you're interested in some of those global connections, I'd invite the EDA team and anybody who's up for it to join us in London. We're going to have an event at our HQ for around 50 to 60 economic developers. So we'd love to have you if you're available for it. All right, let's jump in. So why does investment readiness matter now? One of the things that I like to say about investment readiness is that we can liken it to change, or change management, or change readiness. And I always like to encourage folks when I start these presentations that have to do with change, and the change that we as communities need to adapt to think about a positive experience in your life, where whether it's personally or professionally, where you had to go through a big change, and what made that change positive for you. Whether it was, the trust that was built, the communication that happened, the fact that you've already been through something like this before. And then think of a time where a negative experience where you had to go through a big change, and what made that a negative experience for you. I always like to prime our folks, our economic developers, with this type of framing so that you can get in the right mindset for what we're going to talk about today. Because in the world of economic development, whether it's to attract investment, retain investment, support community development initiatives, changing the way that we think about our work is vital to the work that we do. And I'll say that again, changing the way that we think about our work is vital to the work that we do. And part of this whole concept of investment readiness is changing the way that we think about our work. And, traditionally or typically, there are professions that are called change management, or in our case, investment management, right? Which is more of the blocking and tackling of all the little things that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. It's the coordination of inquiries and incentives. It's the conversations with the management of our elected officials, which is a whole new topic unto itself. But then there's the concept of readiness, which is a state of preparation. It's a mindset, and it's an anticipation of things to come, whether it's different scenarios or opportunities that come. So as we move through this today, I would encourage you, I would challenge you, and hopefully inspire you to see investment readiness not only as a tool, but as a shift in how you think about your work. So why does it really matter? Well, it matters because investment readiness isn't just about the promotion of your place, the marketing of your place, the awareness of your place. It's really about alignment, right? Alignment with how potential investors are assessing risk, resilience, speed to market, alignment between the assets that you have as a community and global capital flows, alignment between your economic development strategy and the on ground delivery, the capacity that you guys have as an organization, the infrastructure that's available to you, and how you deploy it in a smart strategic way. But before I kind of jump into that, I want to just emphasize a couple quick points. We're and I feel like I have to say this like every 1 or 2 years, but you keep on saying something, and it's almost like it becomes your new normal. But I've never seen this in the last 20 years. I haven't seen this type of business environment before. And it keeps on changing, and that level of change or uncertainty is almost like commonplace now. And clients all over continue to ask us, like, well, does that mean um, investment is stopping, investment into communities is stopping? And my answer is typically no, it's not stopping. Our data is saying companies are still investing in locations, economies, and economic development organizations are still trying to attract that investment and retain it and expand it. It's just getting smarter and pickier. The landscape is getting a little bit more complex. And so one of the things that we found, not only in doing through this project, but in other work that we've done, is that the places that can show investment readiness or that are able to show that they can reduce potential risk typically tend to stay on the short list and perform and outperform their peers. We've also seen through our data that the next upswing is not going to be even. And we've seen and we're able to correlate high performing organizations to those that are preparing their competitive advantages. And some of those characteristics include early alignment, consistent execution and discipline, and also focus. So we know what's coming or where we're heading is not going to be even. We know we're going to have to prepare for new ideas, new policies, uh, uh, new headaches. A lot coming from our U.S. government, but we need to be ready to adapt to those. And in order to do that, knowing whatever is going to be thrown at us can change our work potentially in the drop of a dime. The goal is to prepare for that change. So not just waiting for something to pass, but learning how we navigate, how we do our work without wading through it. So one of the things that as we talk about investment readiness, I hear this, and you may say it and maybe spoken in your communities a lot, but this concept of open for business, it's something that is kind of like a pet peeve buzzword, maybe in the economic development profession, or at least for folks like me, because investment readiness isn't just about being open for business. It's about being really intentional about the activities that you take on that we're going to show you in the document. It's about focus. And again, it's about alignment. But all of that starts with a brutal, with brutal clarity and a level of self-awareness for you as the economic developer, the professional that's guiding, facilitating, orchestrating the work, and also your community, self-awareness for your community. Every community that I go into, there are always positive attributes in that community, and there's always negative attributes in that community. And this is one community that I went to visit because I thought this was an interesting sign. When we talk about our communities, we tend to talk about all the positive things in our community, and we tend to try to focus on those positive things. But if we're not taking into account our community as a whole, we're not able to prepare, support, augment, whatever word you want to use to build up that community. And in turn, we end up becoming the type of community that says, "Oh, well, we can do this and we can do that." We're the royal buffet of locations. We try to be everything to everyone without necessarily working or understanding the things that we need to improve that are within or mostly within our control, or I would say sphere of influence that we can try to build up to get better. Now, this whole I would say process led us to where we are today. Nancy mentioned it briefly, but I'll go ahead and give you a high level overview of the context behind this project, kind of why it started, and where we wanted to take it. So one of the things that we recognize, and this isn't just across Alberta, but this is globally, from Africa to Australia, from Denver to Dubai, economic developers are navigating unprecedented levels of change. And a lot of this is starting with shifting investor expectations, tighter capital, workforce constraints, and the growing pressure to deliver results with limited resources. I feel like that's always been there for the economic development profession. But when you add on these other complexities that we're working with, the pressure to deliver with limited resources, like it feels meatier. It carries more weight, and I see that in the work that you all do. I see it in the work that our clients do, and wanted to make sure that we acknowledge it. We also heard as we were going through this process is that we needed a better way to understand where Alberta communities, or any community for that matter, where and when and potentially how ready they were and where they weren't. So what was working well, what wasn't. We found a lot of different, as we worked through this project, we tried to find a lot of different examples of where we could find an investment readiness tool. And there were some high level checklists. There was places in Denmark and Scotland, and a checklist in BC that helped start to shape what investment readiness was. But we realized it wasn't specific enough, or it wasn't adaptable for communities of potentially different sizes, shapes, structures. So we decided to build this tool in partnership with EDA Alberta to evaluate a community's level of investment readiness or competitiveness, however you want to call it, to help identify gaps, to provide us a little bit of self-awareness to know what's working in our communities and what's not, what's working within our organizations, and to potentially shape conversations. I'm a big believer. I'm a big believer that we move in the direction of our conversations, and if we're not having those conversations, whether it's with our regional partners, our elected officials, our staff, about the gaps that we have and where we can improve, it's harder for us to move some of those initiatives or efforts forward. So the tool is really designed to help identify those gaps in readiness and to kind of prioritize some key actions for improvement. Because anybody can kind of go through this process and do it on their own. And if you haven't, you should. I'd obviously recommend leveraging this tool that we're about to show you. But I think the challenge for most practitioners is there wasn't really a standard. There wasn't really a profile or a diagnostic that could really help them evaluate the importance relative to the weight of an activity. Because all of the things that we're doing in economic development or in investment readiness, they're related to certain activities, they're related to certain capabilities, they're related to certain assets. And to try to group those things all together and come up with an approach or a level of measurement for how ready you are, um, hadn't really been done, or hadn't really been put together. So I give Janice, Leanne, Nancy, the EDA team, a lot of credit for bringing this to the table, because it's something that really hadn't been, I would say, formalized or socialized in this way before. One of the things that we did in tandem with this was to complement EDA's business investment and attraction course, which if you haven't been a part of it or taken it, I would highly suggest that you look into it or check out some of the resources um, within the course. But the goal was to arm economic development professionals with insights, strategies, tools that could drive ideas and shape strategies in their day-to-day work. And all this kind of led me back, like, to maybe a deeper question. You know, as economic developers, we're tasked with attracting investment. Like, we're asked can we move forward, or how do we move forward when the world is pulling back? That's probably a better way to frame it. How can we move forward when the world is pulling back? And especially for our Canadian clients and our Canadian partners, this is something that is has dropped on the top of my list of problems to potentially try to solve. And one of the ways that this can potentially be solved or answered is through investment readiness. So what we'll cover kind of just in this overview or demo, so you can start to think or frame your questions, or hopefully this sparks an idea, potentially a conversation, is we'll go kind of through the dimensions of the investment readiness assessment. I'll show you briefly kind of how these were weighted and assigned to each level um, of the dimensions. We'll kind of walk through the tool, and then we can put some Q&A down. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we did to inform this process was kind of do a forensics review of um, the BIA course, which again would highly recommend. We started to research and try to analyze best practices of investment readiness from some of the higher performing economic development clients that we've worked with or been partners with, whether it was IDA Ireland, Singapore, Columbus, Phoenix. We took different examples and we tried to understand and assess what the literature said and what was out there for the economic development community. And then we applied our proven experience in the field, having worked with the client base that we've worked with and our existing data sets. So one of the things that, I didn't speak to up front, one of the data sets that we have at our disposal, being part of the Financial Times, is a data set that helps us understand where investment is moving across which sectors, but more importantly, why it's moving, the motives for why companies are invested. And we've been able to track 400,000 different project types. And across those different projects that we've tracked globally, we're trying to assess and understand the motive behind that investment decision. So part of the motive insights that I say we bring to the table were applied to this process so that we could help economic developers understand what were some of the rationales or reasons that companies were moving from one place to another. But we also took into consideration some of the challenges that you guys work through on a day-to-day basis, and we tried to create a framework for it. So let's talk about the framework. So after a review of the course, our best practice assessments, and some literature around investment readiness, we proposed 9 different pillars of investment readiness for the project across 27 different dimensions. So the different pillars that we talked about, these are the high level pieces, these components that we believe are critical to investment readiness at a high level, right? So if you could say, how would we assess our governance and resources? How would we assess the assets that we have in our community, which are really the things that are tangible, that we can market, that we can promote, that we can see where gaps are? Then we said, hey, do we understand some of the trends, what's happening globally or domestically that may or may not impact more or less investment into our community? So do we understand what's happening? Do we understand the context? Are we able to connect the dots? The other piece was on strategy. Strategy at its most basic level answers 2 questions. Where do we want to go and how will we get there? Now, if you have the context from what's happening globally, where companies are investing, what's happening within economic development, I would say as a whole, you can develop a strategy around it. And following that strategy, another core pillar is, how are we speaking about our community? What is the story that we're telling investors, our stakeholders, our elected officials about our location and what it means to invest, to live, to work in our place? What does that marketing look like? Then we took a dimension of investment facilitation or retention expansion. So how are we facilitating new conversations with our existing investors, and how are we facilitating the conversation after a potential investor has decided to invest in our market. And from there, what's our relationship with these companies in our location? And then how are we evaluating and monitoring our programs? And finally, like, what's our level of resilience? How how does our community respond to change? I asked you guys, hey, how did it feel, personally or professionally, when there was a positive experience with change and there was a negative experience with change? And anybody that I've talked to that's worked in economic development, you can bet that they've had a positive experience, dealing with change professionally, and likely more likely, I should say, negative experiences dealing um, with maybe some challenges related to change in economic development. And resilience is really the strategy or the approach and the mindset that you've taken to overcome some of those challenges of change. So within each of these pillars that you see, we had some or we had some focus dimensions. So within governance and resources, and I'm going to show you this in the tool, but I just wanted to give you a high level example. Within governance and resource, um, you had how ready was the organization? Do we have the human capital? Within community assets, you saw the infrastructure, the asset mapping, SWOT analysis. And you might think, well, yeah, Guillermo, some of these are pretty basic things to have as an organization. But I would ask, have you seen the 30,000-foot view? Have you taken a step back or zoomed out to see where the gaps were? So each one of these pillars, like I said, has 27 dimensions, which I'm going to walk you through. But I wanted to at least give you the context for how we built this. Um, and then within each of those pillars and within each of those dimensions, we started to put weight to them. We started to say, what's more important? Because I think one of the biggest challenges that the economic development community has is in prioritization. You guys are stretched pretty thin. You're asked to do a lot with a little. The question becomes, what do we need to prioritize? And that's something that, it's probably a question that you guys should ask yourselves as you go through this type of work. And hopefully, this assessment can help you understand or align with your community partners on the things that you might need to prioritize in the future. All right, so let's jump out, and I'll give you a demo of the tool, and then I'll make sure that I take some time for questions, because I know I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. Give me a second. I'm going to share the tool and then discuss. All right, make it bigger for you guys. Give me one second. And you guys can see my screen okay? Yeah, awesome. All right, so here's the assessment. And, you know, Janice, feel free to jump in if I'm not articulating how best to get there, or maybe you guys can speak to that afterwards. But the idea is, having taken the BIA course, you understand some of the fundamentals of, you know, investment and attraction work. And so you've kind of familiarized yourself with maybe some of the terminology, with maybe some of the approaches, some of the solutions that other organizations have brought to the table or offered. And after you've taken that course, you would be given the chance to take this community investment readiness self-assessment. And we called it a self-assessment for a couple reasons. The first is, we don't want anybody getting fired over this. We know that, putting out reports and rankings, there's a fine line to doing that. And we say, hey, we're a 9 out of 10, or we're a 5 out of 10, and this becomes public. It can in some cases, I should say, it can be detrimental to the economic developers. So we wanted to be clear. This is a way to self-assess. This is a way to become a little bit more self-aware. This wasn't a report that was intended to go out in, in your local publications or in your local media. That wasn't the goal to shame anybody or to call any organization out or to call any economic developer out. The goal was to find areas where there were gaps to enable conversations. Um, since the initial version, we've added, and I'll show you the 10 pillars. We've added another pillar and another dimension, which I will talk through. But you'll get this Excel. You'll as soon as you open it, it'll ask you to enable macros, and you can just enable that at the top of your toolbar. It'll provide kind of some high level details on how to assess it, um, how the EDA will use the data, because ultimately the goal in developing this was to start to collect data at scale. Because if our partners at the EDA are able to see, hey, this gap is something that is so recurring across all of our economic development clients, maybe we can provide more content to that. Maybe we can develop more programming or seek different funding to try to support this different gap. So the goal was to try to get more of our Alberta communities to use this at scale to help identify common challenges or opportunities, and then tailor the work of the EDA, the professional development that they provide to support you guys in these areas. And then also, to enable peer-to-peer learning opportunities. I know I'm going to have a conversation with a community after this call, but to allow different communities to share their perspectives and to collaborate on certain readiness initiatives, it's a lot easier to do that when you're all speaking the same language, right? And this is a way, I think, in some sense, that the EDA has kind of codified that language for you guys, but also to support it as a tool for advocacy, and potentially funding that aligns with the real needs of your community. So within this introduction piece, we have some helpful links. And as you read through it, you can click through and you'll just hit instructions here. And make it bigger again. We have the instructions about what you need to do before you start. You've reviewed the guidelines. You guys are doing this right now, familiarizing yourselves with the process. You'll provide some initial details. So when we go to the next slide, you'll put in the date, your name, the community, and the organization that you represent. And then you'll respond to each question. And each question will have a corresponding column and a drop-down level of menus for you guys to pick your answers, scaled low to high, 1 being low, 5 being high. And as part of this process and doing this, it's really important that you try to answer all of the questions. I know we may have some communities that, might feel insecure about answering some of these because you might not have the assets or the resources, or you might not have the structure to answer some of them. But I would suggest answer all of the questions if you're going to take this, because skipping some of the sections will result in a incomplete assessment. And then once you're done, and I'm going to show you this, you'll be able to submit your response. That'll go to the EDA team, and they will notify you that they got the response. And I don't know, Janice, if the process has changed since we last spoke, but maybe we can speak to that. Maybe we can speak to that afterwards.
Sure.
Cool. And then once you've submitted, you'll be able to see your dashboard. You can review it, share your insights with the stakeholders, and then complete your assignment by uploading the assessment back into the learning path within BIA. So let's jump in. Let me walk you through it, and I will. Again, this is make it bigger so you guys can see it. Okay, so again, you're going to have your pillars on the left, the dimension of each pillar, and then we're starting to ask questions about those pillars. So rather than it just being a checklist, we're trying to make it more diagnostic. So again, all of these pieces are, I would say, more like firmographic type information, so that we know, hey, so that we can make correlations in the future. So for example, if you say, hey, the size of my community, and you'll go into each tab, for the majority of the tabs, there will be a drop down. But the reason that we ask for the size of your community is so we can make uh, some correlations between the results and the size of your organization. Or if we can say, hey, did you know that an organization of this size or somebody that works in this department scored their assessment higher? Because one of the things that we would suggest to you all after you've taken the assessment is potentially share it with your colleague and compare notes. How does that assessment change within the organization? Or in some cases, if you're comfortable with it, saying, hey, if you're an elected official or if you're looking to engage in those types of conversations, have them see what they say. I'd be curious to see what the results, how they differ. And one of the things that you'll find is if those results are aligned, that means there's more alignment between you and your elected official. That means they know what you know. And in theory, I would say in theory, because it doesn't always happen in practice, if they are aligned to the work that you're doing and the gaps that your community has, they essentially, in theory, would be better prepared to support your work or support funding for your work in the future. So one of the questions that where we start to get into kind of um, the more qualitative questions within the assessment is how familiar you are with, investment attraction strategy and investment readiness. You'll see the different drop downs that we have here, from extremely familiar to not really familiar at all. And then we get into the organization. And this is kind of, I do a lot of work with teams. I do a lot of work with organizations about their structure and how they're built to serve the objectives that they're intended to serve, or the metrics that they're judged on or bonused by. So you start to look at, okay, is there an individual on the team that's a primary contact? Um, do you have a dedicated organization, or are you part of, you know, um, a different association, or are not in the economic development uh, profession? Then you ask, do we have significant human and financial resources to support investment attraction? Again, you'll go through each one of these and say, hey, I either strongly disagree to I strongly agree. And each one of these, when we go to the next step, you'll see how it's mapped out. So from organizational readiness, we move on to questions that kind of assess human capital. And one of the things that we found in economic development is a lot of folks have defined roles, but not as many defined responsibilities, or as I like to say, accountabilities. So who does what, and is that clear throughout the organization? We ask about, is there been training in certain areas, whether it's with investment attraction or facilitation and retention? Has there been training? Because you can have the people and you can have the structures, but if they haven't been trained, or I would say the more trained that they are, the better work or the better outcomes that we've seen from organizations. So we talked through governance and resources, but the next dimension was your assets. And a lot of times folks will just go through, like, I just need to do an asset mapping inventory. Let me um, let me see what we have in our space. But we tried to break community assets within again, a couple sub dimensions, such as infrastructure, and some elements related to the community. So part of this is structural, part of this is strategic. So again, thinking 30,000-foot view, we ask questions like, is your community's infrastructure well maintained and capable of meeting current and future demands? In these cases, we say yes, no, or if you're having conversations around it, or if this is planned in the future, we give you the opportunity to put planned in this box. So again, all of these are drop-down boxes that you can go ahead and check off. And we tried to be as thoughtful as we could about almost every word that we used in each of these questions, so that it was as intentional as possible. So we're asking questions about water, waste management systems, uh, high-speed internet, broadband, and then we started to talk about, okay, have you done have you taken on certain efforts like asset mapping or creating SWOT and gap analysis? And then within, rather than just asking like, have you done it? Have you created it? We're asking, have you used these to change behaviors within the organization or within the community, whether it was to refine these strategies or identify additional weaknesses. So you might think, well, Guillermo, kind of this sounds like a little bit repetitive. And I would say my response back would be, we need to go as deep as we can on this 30,000 foot view for you guys to be able to focus on the things um, that are going to make the most impact for your organization. So after SWOT and gap analysis, we ask questions in and around a profile of your community. So have you created a set list of competitive advantages for your business or for the location? Um, and then is your community business friendly and support growth across all industry sectors? This is a question that we had to, and these last two questions were actually ones that we had to discuss, in depth with the EDA team, because a lot of communities will say, yeah, we're a business friendly community, but when it comes down to certain sectors, we might not want a data center. Our residents might not want data centers in our backyard. So then we ask if there are any sectors in your community that your community wouldn't be open to investment from. What are those? What are those sectors? And so we gave kind of a list of sectors, and this comes from our FDI markets database taxonomy. They're generally associated with certain NAICS codes, but we wanted to try to keep it as high level as possible. So, for example, we could put, OEM, automotive OEM, or we could select multiple of these. But this points out when somebody's reading this assessment or when they are all aggregated together, some of the sectors that maybe need a little bit more education on, or um, might need a little bit more data to validate why they could be a good fit or why they might not be a good fit in some cases. This next section was really about trend awareness. So understanding what's happening globally, how emerging sectors and technologies are impacting investments, and how your organization are analyzing these types of drivers. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's, have you done these types of things? And if so, to what degree? We looked at competitor benchmarking, understand how your location, your organization compares to your competitive set and where there are gaps, and then how your organization tries to monitor or keep up with some of the strategies used by competitive regions. Because in our world of economic development, there's really not very many original ideas. It's really how we can take ideas and make them better or make them our own or modify them to the work that we do. In this next pillar, you see things like related to investment attraction strategy, which requires strategic planning, um, targeting, profiling. So looking at and asking if your organization has prioritized certain sectors or subsectors for investment, and if those prioritization efforts were validated with data, or has your organization assessed the potential for diversification based on what's going on in your community. And then lastly, and we get this a lot, we always ask economic developers like, hey, what are your targeted sectors? They give us like 10 to 12. And that kind of brings us back, makes me feel like I'm back at the Royal Buffet, which it's great that your community has potentially the capacity to attract these different types of investments. But for a targeted approach, narrowing that list of sectors is really important, and prioritizing them. Which sectors have the highest potential to invest in your market and would create the most impact? Because we're not just looking at investment of any kind, especially for your communities. It's the right types of investment that fit the needs, the values of the communities that you guys are working in. And then which markets that you're focusing on. Are there high potential markets, low potential markets? Do you know, have you identified here, these are our tier one markets that we're focusing on? And maybe those markets have changed over the last, 12 months. Maybe they haven't, but prioritizing these markets is really important. On the marketing side, we're looking at things like your marketing strategy. Do you have well-defined activities or KPIs? The assets that you have, do you have good one sheets, a value proposition for certain sectors? Do you have an investor-friendly website, or is your website the city's website or the municipality's website with a paragraph on economic development? And we have our rationale, and I can speak to that if there's any questions that come up from that. But what are your assets from a marketing perspective? What's your foundation? And once you have your foundation or have a sense of your foundation and answer these questions, it's what types of activities that you do or do you do, or what types of partnerships that you put in place. So each one of these questions aligns to a best practice. If it's 100% yes, that's best practice in terms of what we see. Now, I understand that some of these, we might, if you're a smaller community or a rural community, while still important, you might not have partnerships with international organizations or international representatives to enhance your market reach, and that's okay. Like I said before, this is about being brutally honest with yourselves about your organization and your community. And then in terms of investment facilitation, this is where we put the dimensions of site and infrastructure support, workforce skills, incentives, and regulatory support. So we're asking questions like, are you able to upload properties to a searchable database? Do you have an organization of your listings? Are you having communication with commercial realtors or producing effective resolutions for site and infrastructure challenges? So again, you'll work through all these questions, move into the workforce questions, um, incentive and regulatory support questions, which I won't go through them all. And then you'll get to the next pillar, which is how are you managing investor relationships? And so within the dimensions, we're looking at support services, whether it's we have a dedicated CRM system tracking, the outreach that we make, our potential interactions and activities, a process to resolve challenges faced by existing investors. So again, answering these questions in terms of how you communicate with them, um, how targeted you are in their concerns and opportunities, and then certain personas that maybe require different level of services. So the manufacture companies in the manufacturing space uh, and business owners, I should say, that are in the manufacturing space are completely different profiles than a business owner in the professional services or technology space, right? They're maybe of different, they may have different generational differences, but working within the industry, they have different needs, and they support their businesses in, I would say, different ways. So, do you have a sense of how these personas within your community operate? And then the last two is monitoring and evaluation. Do you have targets for investment promotion activities? Could be leads, project wins, or other activities that you guys have defined. And do you measure the performance of your organization against KPIs on or at least a quarterly basis? And by KPIs, I mean, if your organization has objectives, like our objective is to generate, you know, X amount of jobs or X amount of investment, you might not even have that level of an objective. But within each objective that your organization has, there should be some indicators or KPIs that say this is how we know that we're moving in the right direction or on track. So we're asking those types of questions. And one of the questions that I think was interesting, and it's something that I think every organization could benefit from, is how does your organization talk about the impact that you've had on the community? And how are you talking about this to leadership, to stakeholders? I remember some of our Calgary clients, I think, had done a great job of saying this is the impact, or this is the role of economic development. This is the role that we've played in it. And I think we've, for a long time, the economic development community has kind of said, hey, we don't want to, um, they're reluctant to have those types of conversations in public because it makes them vulnerable for public attacks or scrutiny. But what we found is over time, the organizations that are communicating their impact, and they may or may not have had to feel a little bit of scrutiny in doing so, are the ones that are more aligned and can move faster on certain initiatives because the community knows their role and the impact that they play, yeah, in that community. And then lastly, we're asking questions related to resilience. So risk assessments and preparedness, um, mitigation strategies in place to address certain impacts on business and investments, disaster recovery plans and prioritization work, and investment and sustainability initiatives as part of a resilient strategy. So each of these questions, you'll go down, you'll answer them, however it fits for your organization, and then you'll hit submit. Once you hit submit, you'll see this tab, this come up. Um, Responses have been recorded and locked in a master sheet, which is governed by EDA, and then it'll take you to the results page. Oops, I made that too big. So the results page is really trying to interpret your results. So you put your name on the assessment, your organization, and you can start to see your absolute score or how you compared within each of these dimensions. So, again, the categories were familiarity with investment. You can see based on how we answered this, the dimension is strong, and you can see that no immediate action is required. So the goal was to say, if it's green, like you don't really need to take an action. If it's yellow, there's some moderate performance. You can review and kind of address where there's gaps. If it's red, we suggested prioritizing action. So you can see the absolute score, the max score, and your final score across all the pillars and all of the dimensions that were supported by the questions that you guys answered in the tab before. So based on that, you can go ahead and see, okay, well, let's look at what this means. So we tried to give some high level interpretations of this, but the goal was really just how can we quickly surface priorities based on the questions that you guys answered. Um, and you can see the bigger priorities based on the score here, and then the secondary potential areas of improvement that you can see here. But we didn't want to just end it at, you know, that. Anytime you do any type of assessment of your organization or of the work that you do, you always have to ask what's working well, what's not working well, and what's in plan or in place so that we can decide what we're going to do next. So you can see the things that are working well based on the assessment, things that your organization has currently planned out. And if there's no plan in place, you can see where there's no plan in place. So this